Consciousness Rising Zimbabwe and beyond. This is Tania Norris, and on today's show, we're going to be featuring Klara Rosa, who has an extremely rich and intriguing story of how she ended up being a shaman practicing right here in Zimbabwe. Klara is an author, a poet, a musician, a violinist, an academic, and she has studied in Poland, America, Peru, and Africa, and somehow has managed to take all of those talents and weave them together into her own unique ceremonial and shamanic practice. So before I introduce you to Klara, I just wanted to also say, please, about our channel. We are a channel that brings you interesting people that are doing great things, mainly in the alternative world. In the world today, there seems to be a big push and a big hunger for alternative, different ways to live. I think people are getting tired. They're realizing that they have to be more creative, more personalized, more internalized. And so this is what this channel is about. So please do check out all of our other interviews. Please like them, share them, because you never know who at that time is going to need to hear that particular podcast on that day. So without any further ado, I'm now going to introduce you to Klara. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi, Klara.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Oh, no, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. You have an extremely, as I said earlier, a unique story and a unique journey into your shamanic practice. Before we start, I just want you to talk about your books. You gave me one book here to read. Okay, I just want to show everybody. I don't know, I hope that comes up the right way around.
Yes, it actually does.
Okay. Wild Medicine, A Journey to Zimbabwe. Okay, and that is only one book that I'm still in the process of reading. Klara, tell us about what are the other books that people can look at?
Yes, well, the one that currently I'm going to start marketing more, I guess you could say aggressively, that has more to do with my life's work. It's called Ceremony Theater, Mystical Texts for the Human and Non-Human Worlds. I'm also, both of that book is published in both in Polish and in English. And that's the one I would recommend. It's a series of texts that really is, again, my work, especially as a ceremonialist. I also wrote The Star Ceremony, which is a poetic nonfiction rendition of the Isis Osiris story for the modern times, for modern day. What else did I write? I wrote a book in Polish, Będziemy się za was modlić z Polski do Zimbabwe ścieżkami Przodków, which means we will pray for you from Poland to Zimbabwe by the way of the ancestors. And that book is where Wild Medicine is the first part of my journey to Zimbabwe. That book, the Polish book, is really the second part of that same journey. Yeah, and those books can be found on Amazon. They can be found online. They can be found if you contact me directly. So I do recommend those books. Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning it.
Yeah, I just wanted to get that because I know once you get into it, then we forget all of that. But I will put all of those links in this conversation below.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so let us start. You mentioned to me, we talk about shamanism, all right? And what I'd just like to know, what is your interpretation of shamanism? You did mention to me that it kind of hails from the Russian region. I always thought it came more from the Sweden and Finland and places like that. And you said no, that shamanism, as the word describes, let's put it that way, actually comes from the region where you live.
Well, it comes from the word shaman, and the reason why, I mean, the word shaman is so controversial, which I like to simplify things. I don't like for things to be so complicated when it comes to spiritual practitioners. So what I learned is that in the process of not using the word shaman, I would confuse people, and then I would say something like a shaman or something like shamanism or something like, and people would say, oh yes, they understand. So for some reason, the word shaman, which that word does come from Siberia and the spiritual practitioners of Siberia and the ancestral practitioners of Siberia, it has become a global term for a spiritual practitioner of all kinds. This isn't just healers. In fact, there are a lot of shamans who are not healers, but it's people who are born with a connection to the spiritual world that makes them a native of the spiritual world. And those bridges, that bridge of communication, connection, nativity with the spirit world, means that certain things in the material world can continue going or can be understood at their root. Maybe that's a good way of trying to give a broad definition. Yeah.
Okay.
Because
I think,
yeah.
carry on.
Oh, I was just saying that I think that these days there's a lot of, people make fun of the term, people make fun of people who they say they call themselves shamans or so on. But I feel that in our general maybe cynicism and mockery of a term that is really a gift to us as humanity, which is a person who again can and does and is born into working with the spirit realm, and that's something that's necessary for all of us.
Correct. Traditionally, shamanism, it seems to have quite the word or the idea has quite a heavy weight. So as you said earlier, anybody who does any kind of spiritual practice could call themselves a shaman, in theory. However, in our Western understanding, we sort of think of, Native Americans with their sweat houses, people living in the Amazon, and those kind of shamans, which has a completely different and I think a more native lean towards it, is what we in the West understand, I think, as shamanism. All right. And what do you think?
Well, I think that those are very good points, and we could have an entire discussion certainly just about the word shaman and what that means in our world. In my experience, I can say that to be a shaman or to be born a shaman is not unusual. It is not only for certain people in certain cultures. It's a global phenomenon. It's an earth phenomenon. There are certain people who are born with certain connections. But the question is, are those connections developed? And is the wisdom behind those connections, is it developed? Because you have a lot of shamans who are shamans, but they behave quite foolishly. But that doesn't mean they're not shamans. They just behave foolishly. So certain initiations or the gathering of wisdom, and certainly the wisdom that we are born with, but then the wisdom that has a practical application to this world and this life, those things can be developed and nurtured and grown. But the spiritual connection, this is I find it quite amazing because I come from Poland. I'm Slavic, and I love my culture. The Slavic cultures have very deep roots and very deep spiritual roots. So if you look at our culture, we have a very strong connection to ancestor. We have a very strong connection to nature. We have our traditional ceremonies and rituals, and we, to look at somebody like me, for example, and say just because of your skin color, you must not be connected to ancestor, is very strange, because there's no human being on earth that is not connected to ancestors, and through which the ancestors need certain work done, or the spirits, they need certain work done. And I think given all of our global crises right now, I do think that there's an explosion of spiritual workers and practitioners, not because they are just calling themselves shamans or so on, but because the earth needs intervention, spiritual intervention from all people and all cultures. We all need to work together these days. That's my experience and my vision.
Exactly, which is why I think all these things are just popping up all over. You know, every time you turn around, somebody else is doing some other kind of, and creating their own. And that's what I love. You know, it's taking
Yes.
all their knowledge, all their wisdom, and creating their own thing, which you have done. What I find quite incredible, and I did mention this to you before, is that essentially you're an academic. You've got a few degrees behind you. You know, you have to be fairly academic to be an author. You have a production company, apart outside of the music side of it. So that to me indicates somebody who's pretty grounded. You know, I find a lot of our people in our spiritual community are very with the ether. And yet, to be an academic, you have to be actually quite grounded. So I love that combination. And it's also one of the questions I have for you is, how does somebody who is so academic and clearly quite bright, I must point out to our listeners here that Klara is only in her mid-30s and she's achieved all of this. So obviously fairly academic and bright. How do you then go from all that academia to being a shaman?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I personally, I wouldn't use the word, I would use the term creative or artist, in the sense that and definitely I do have it in my nature or in my makeup, the strong need to produce, the strong need to have works, my works, be out in the world. So whether it's music, whether it's theater, whether it's film, whether it's the Nyamatsatse festival, there's just a sense of creative need. I would also say, for me, for my journey, my degrees, the ones that I have, I am currently working on a doctorate, which would support your academic theory, through the University of South Africa. But I'm working on that doctorate as a spiritual practitioner. So it's different now. But before, all of my degrees, that was before, I guess you could say, my official initiations, shamanic initiations, began. And even though there were invitations, I was not able to see the invitations for certain kinds of initiations at the time. The degrees have served me quite well in terms of opportunities, but they were not my most important education. They were more a time and a space to also create. When I was in college, I was performing, I was recording, I was making theater. Same thing in my graduate degree, I was making theater. So the shamanic initiations, though, they started because I have had a very, I guess you could say, radical insertion of a shamanic illness, I should say, in my life. So I spent a lot of my life in extreme physical pain. And at certain times, that I believe was an invitation, an initiatory invitation. And at the point where I was finally able to, that was after I finished my master's degree, and I was burnt out, I was sick. I was very sick, with no hope of recovery, no hope that any doctor could give me of getting better. And this constant feeling like somehow I was not living the truth. Like there was a truth to all of this, and I was meant for something very different. And that was when, through, again, circumstance and the goodness of the spirit, I met the right people who started teaching me, who started taking me through the first initiations. I started working with plants, and that was also when I started having dreams that said, you have to go to Zimbabwe, you have to go to Zimbabwe, you have to go to Zimbabwe. There's something very important for you in Zimbabwe. And it was only here that there were certain initiations that I, and I can say I'm still in the process of, I don't think initiations end. I also feel that way, that we go through a cycle, we go through a cycle, we go through a cycle. We're always learning, as I am, to become ourselves. So for me, it was also realizing on my own body that spiritual wildness. The shaman is a spiritually wild person. And what I see in the, even I guess you could say, alternative health community, which is what my first book is about really, is that people try to apply the so-called scientific principles to the alternative community. So they, they'll put acupuncture through a study, or they'll put a certain supplement through a study, and they'll say this works for this and this and this. But from the indigenous knowledge system perspective, there's no such thing, because every intervention is your relationship with a particular spirit. And so I can have, for example, if there's a spirit in this plant that wants to help me, even if that plant theoretically shouldn't help me, I can be completely cured in a day. But if the spirit of a plant that should be helping me, if we do not have a good relation, for whatever reason, maybe my ancestors also do not have a good relation with that plant, then that plant will not help me. So the intuitive way of healing is really listening to and talking to. It's a relationship oriented life where nothing, not even whether it's alternative supplements or chemicals, nothing is treated as something that does not have a spirit. Everything has to be the right thing at the right moment. So
and that must be why we need to develop our intuition as individuals.
Yes.
And understand what
Yes.
is the treatment, what is the practice or herb that we're going to be taking. Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
and that's why for my work as well, I'm a ceremonialist, I'm a ritualist, and I see that at least in the Western world, again, even in alternative communities, the lack of ceremony and the lack of ritual, even in alternative health spaces, is doing a lot of damage, because it's misunderstanding how we actually come into relationship with.
Right. Klara, are you taking clients at the moment?
Yes, I do take clients. I do
Okay.
take clients. I'm doing some online teaching as well.
Oh, online teaching. All right, super. So again, we will put all of those links in this video underneath. So I want to just talk a little bit about my experience, because I actually had a session with Klara, and what can I say? There was, for me, something that I would say, yes, quite native and quite tribal about that, okay, which I like, but I also have a personal belief system in the power of that and how that can help me. When I say that, I'm talking about maybe throwing off sticks, using herbs and things like that. I found it very useful in my life as ways of divination for somebody and for myself. And but what I did find quite extraordinary was the way you brought in sound, because obviously you're a musician, and we all know about the vibration of sound and the healing of that frequencies. But you actually, and it's the first time ever it's happened to me, that you actually use your voice. Okay. And Klara has an extremely powerful voice that goes over many ranges. And it is quite a unique experience. You can actually feel the vibration of that. Whereas before, I've had things like chimes, bowls, in different types of healing sessions. So this I found extremely, and again, working, Klara, you work on that very intuitive level, so that you know what it is. And I just found it extremely beautiful, soothing, relaxing. There was nothing aggressive about it, because I do find that a lot of our traditional shamanism, if you want to call it that, or traditional healers and whatever, can be quite loud and quite aggressive, which has its place. But I didn't find that. It was soothing, it was beautiful, it was calming. And and I loved every minute of it. So I really do encourage people to look into that and look into the work that Klara is doing, because I think it can really be transformational, and not just for us, but also for our country. Because remember, this is what each and every one of us as tiny little lights are trying to do for the big national light, if you want to call it that, for the country, for the globe. Yeah, so I encourage people to do that. Now, another project that you have going on, Klara, is it the Nyamatsatse? Is that how you pronounce it?
The Nyamatsatse Festival.
Nyamatsatse Festival. What does Nyamatsatse mean?
Nyamatsatse means morning star.
Okay. So the Morning Star, or the Nyamatsatse Festival. Now, this is something that you've organized, which please explain to people when it is, what it's going to involve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the Nyamatsatse Festival, we had our first edition of the festival last year. It was a 7-day journey, so it was a festival ceremony. And in combination, also inspired by, again, I mean, as a ceremonialist or traditional ceremony, but also these visions of ceremony as it was practiced in temple culture in ancient Kemet or Egypt, which is this idea that a ceremony has its public for everyone aspect, and it also has its private aspect at the same time, that both happen at the same time in order to create something that actually feeds life to people, to the environment, to nature, to the spirit, to the spirits, to the ancestors, that it's able to create a lot of life for everything and everybody. And I think all people who go to ceremonies and understand that intuitively, they will understand when they're in a ceremony, for example, when something has been not prepared well in these private spaces. It's something you can feel. So last year, our theme was putting together the pieces of the broken human spirit. So it was based on the myth of Isis and Osiris, and this idea that the morning star Nyamatsatse is the light of the morning star, the light of the magical star, of which Sirius was considered that magical star in Kemet, will put together these broken pieces of humanity, that we have been broken, all of us have been broken. There's not a single person on this globe today that does not have trauma in their recent or further lineage. And so all of us were broken inside, but we're broken outside also, especially COVID. Drew a lot of lines, separated us from each other, but that was really an expression of where it seemed we were going anywhere. So it was that thing of let's reconnect with the stars, the light of the stars, let's reconnect with nature, with the ancestors, with the spirit, and with each other, and let's celebrate that. And it went quite well. We were actually, we were very grateful for how well it went last year. So this year we are doing our second edition, and our theme this year, our myth, is the flood myth, and our theme is water, women, and the stars, and the time of the flood. But the flood myth is the base of that. So we're focusing on water, the water spirits, and then, of course, the feminine aspect, the goddess aspect, women, the yin nature, wherever it is, and the intelligence, also the consciousness of water, the spirit of water. And we are doing it in September this year. So it's September 17th through 24th. We are currently organizing venues. We do have our promos that are available online. We are taking submissions right now. So I encourage anybody who feels moved by, we call it the spirit of Nyamatsatse, which is the spirit of joy, connection, coming together, and singing, not just for people, but also for the spirit of water, for us to really also, all of us come from the water. Again, there's not a single human being on this planet at this moment that has not come from the water, and the water in their mother's womb. And that does not come from woman as well. So that question of how do we revive and re-inspire not just these ideas of, I don't know, like women's issues, for example, which I get very turned off by all of these political, social statements of women's issues or gender-based violence. I don't even know what those words mean, to be honest. So this idea that somehow in order to bring attention to, I don't know, rape, we have to recreate rape. I always found that very weird. We have to bring it into human consciousness. But in that sense, all we're doing is recreating rape. Same thing with a lot of trauma. All we seem to know how to do is to recreate trauma. So Nyamatsatse initially was also meant to be a space for artists and art that is going a step beyond recreating trauma. Because a lot of us now, we need to express, and I know, me too, I need to express. But what is the step later after we express our feelings, whatever it is, our trauma? What happens next? What is that next step? Where do we actually transform? So in some ways, we're hoping that Nyamatsatse this year will also be able to be a rebirth of sorts for all of us, not just in Zimbabwe. But I've also always felt that this land here in Zimbabwe, it's very sacred. The spirits here are very powerful. They're very beautiful. And the things that happen here are very important for the globe. Ceremonially speaking, the things that happen here are very important for the whole world. I've felt it, I've seen it. And so I hope that Nyamatsatse in that way also connects with everything.
Okay, so that is over a few days, different ceremonies on different days?
No, it's
or
yes
one
and
big
no.
ceremony?
It's 7 days. But there are celebrations, there are workshops, there are panelists, there are speakers, there are artists. We have videos also from last year. And then we have a all-night celebration, which is a ceremony which ends the Nyamatsatse. And we also start with ceremonies. There are definitely ceremonies in and out of the whole thing, but to me, the whole thing is a ceremony because it's a container. When we say the word ceremony, I'm not a traditionalist in the sense that things have to be done like this or else this isn't a ceremony. Ceremony was brought to us as a technology that also thrives on intuition, availability, flexibility, creativity. And in that sense, all ceremony is it's a container. So if we say at the beginning of Nyamatsatse, we have this Nyamatsatse pot, Hari Nyamatsatse or something, and then we put in elements, we put in music, we put in speech, we put in prayers, we put in panels, we put in workshops, we put in all of these things, and we're cooking it. And then at the very end, we say, okay, now we open the lid and all of us drink some of this Nyamatsatse stew or brew or whatever it is. And then we give some to the water as well, and we give some to the earth, and we give some to the ancestors, and we give some to the spirit and God and the big love, and we give some to, you know, whoever is suffering anywhere in the world and in time. That's a way of creating ceremony, making ceremony, and doing it well, you know, protecting also this pot in the process. To me, those have been in my book, Ceremony Theater. That's really what I write about, because the most powerful ceremonies that I've created, they are based on spiritual principles. They're based on spiritual laws, but they are a process of co-creation, usually between myself and nature. And then other people come in and we do in some ways what we are given to do. But it's a creative process. It's not, yeah.
I love that analogy that you used there with the pot, of putting everything in the pot, letting it cook, and then sharing it. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful. You did mention to me as well that you feel, I said to you about ancestors, we had a conversation about that, and I was saying, well, you know, to me, in my limited understanding, I always thought when native cultures talk about ancestors, they're talking about their dead relatives, okay, going back in that lineage. And you said, no, it's not, ancestors are not that. Just explain to people what your perception of ancestors are.
Yes, I've also found that, and in my learning, I guess you could say academically, we like to to understand these different differentiations and so on. And when I started, it's actually quite interesting because like many Polish people, we also have a lot of trauma in our history, and you will find a lot of Polish people for whom family is an incredibly painful subject. There's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of misunderstandings, there's a lot of brokenness within that. Of course, I don't speak for all Polish people, but it's there. We have a traumatized, especially 19th, 20th century history. I mean, it's been tough. So when I first started, one of my main teachers was Malidoma Somé, who was a shaman from Burkina Faso, a Dagara shaman, and he did my first ever shell divination, bone shell divination, was with him. And he was talking about ancestors, and I'm not really feeling anything about ancestors, just that when I think about family, it's painful. There's a lot of pain. And confusion that a lot of people will have when it comes to ancestors. Like, okay, you know, there are these ancestors, but for example, I don't know, my grandfather is dead, but my grandfather was not a good person, not a nice person. I don't want to talk to him, for example. Or if, you know, ancestors, human ancestors, well, they're human beings, so how powerful can they really be? I would rather talk to angels, or I would rather talk to, you know, higher entities, or whatever it is. And then I learned in the process, there's a division between your own human ancestral family and the great ancestors, as we think of them, as elements, entities, guardians, beings that also are so old, they're not quite human, you know. Some people, they look at, again, ancient Kemet, they'll say, okay, you know, these are visions of ancestors. They're part animal, part human, part plant, part human, part elemental, you know, water, part human, part fire, part human, part star, or just star, literally. And they come down, and somehow they also infuse who we are as humans. We are a combination of so many different things, you know, including water, including stardust, including fire. We are elemental beings and all of that. So these great ancestors, the important thing, the reason why it's important that we call them ancestors, is the thing to understand about the spirit world is it's extremely vast and it's very wild. And no single person will ever be able to understand the entirety of the spirit world, you know, all the things, all the beings, all the so on. And within that huge vastness, there's us human beings who are quite small and quite, you know, we're not necessarily the wisest beings in this universe, no offense to humanity. And within all of that, there are beings that are personally interested in making sure that things go well for us. They are our relatives, they are our family members in a very, very traditional sense, as the ones who care for you, the ones who are connected so deeply to you that your good is their good. I don't, you know, not the family, again, that is the traumatized family or the betraying family, but that deep connection. And also the ones who know what it means to be human. Because I think in a lot of, not just the Chivano, but also in a lot of indigenous knowledge systems worldwide, there's an emphasis. What makes us beautiful is our ability to be human. Not necessarily in the sense that we are faulty and flawed and so on, but that there's something about being human that's actually very magically potent, beautiful, that's just beautiful. And if there are ancestors who say, we know that human beings need shelter, food, sleep, they need certain very human things. They need clothes, they can't walk around naked. So we know that, and we also know that when they have a certain context, when they're brought through certain things, they become more and more beautiful, more and more human. And I think one of the illnesses that we are globally suffering from these days is that we have forgotten what it is to be human. We have forgotten that it is actually a beautiful thing. We make all of these technologies, all of these systems to try to either suppress ourselves or to better ourselves. But neither one is what we need. We need to actually learn ourselves. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I've been saying that for a long time to a lot of people, is in my belief system anyway, that you're not spiritual unless you can be human. Unless you can embrace your humanity, your physical body, be that, warts and all, you're not spiritual, you know? So it's almost like this humanness is like the platform for the antenna for anything outside of us, be it above, around, beneath. You know, it's how I understand it. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. Okay, Klara. So we're going to have to draw this to an end. Thank you. Just one more thing I wanted to ask you. I saw you posted something that you are looking for anybody who might want to contribute to the festival.
Yeah, our submissions for the festival are open now.
Yes,
Yeah?
okay.
Sorry, so you had a question about that?
Yeah. That's what I wanted to tell people. So anybody listening who feels that they might have something fantastic to contribute to the festival, then they must contact you as well.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes,
Perfect.
absolutely.
And thank you for taking us on this wild journey of explanation and exploration. And really good luck with the festival. As I said to everybody, everything is going to be below. If you want to contact Klara for a session or about the festival, please, all that information is going to be there. Also, a link to her music, because she's got music on Spotify and books and many other things that she does. It will all be in the description below. So thank you so much, Klara. And
thank you so much, Tanya.
No. You're very welcome, and thank you to our listeners, and please share this far and wide. And until the next time, we'll see you then. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Klara.